The slap landed before she had thought to raise her hand. She had not meant to cross the room. She had not meant to do anything at all. That was her particular genius, after all, the art of being nowhere anyone looked. But Lord Ashvire had been speaking for 4 minutes, and in those 4 minutes, he had reduced Lady Cecily Vane to a creature so small and so still that the girl was visibly holding her breath against the hope that she might disappear entirely before he finished. And so Marin Ashby, companion, dependent, the woman in the faded blue dress whom no one at Harrogate had ever troubled themselves to notice, crossed 12 feet of polished floor and slapped the Honorable Edmund Ashvire across his right cheek with the flat of her hand. She did not know yet what it would cost her. Had she known, she would have crossed the room all the same. The silence afterward was of the particular variety that collects before a chandelier falls. 23 guests at the Vane family's summer assembly. 23 people who had, until this moment, maintained the comfortable fiction that Marin Ashby was furniture. They looked at her now. She let them look. She had 22 pounds in the world, no family worth the naming, and she was standing in the great hall of Harrogate with her hand still warm from the blow, and every one of the 23 people in that room would see the whole of her life rearranged by the end of the night. She knew it. She kept her chin level. She squared her feet. The man who should have spoken first did not. Lucian Vane, Duke of Harrogate, stood at the far end of the room beside the fireplace with a glass he had not drunk from, and he was looking at her with an expression she could not name. Not anger, not surprise, precisely, something quieter than either. She had been in his house for 3 years, and he had spoken to her perhaps a dozen times. She had catalogued those dozen conversations the way she catalogued everything, neatly and without sentiment, because neat and without sentiment was how one survived being poor in a wealthy house. She had concluded, on the evidence, that the Duke noticed very little outside his own considerable grief and his sister's welfare, and that she was encompassed by neither. She had been content with this conclusion. She had built her invisibility on it like a house on stone. The stone had just shifted. The Harrogate Summer Assembly ended 40 minutes earlier than planned. Lady Cecily was taken upstairs by her maid with her face carefully composed in the way of girls who have learned to perform composure before they have learned to feel it. Edmund Ashvire left by the east door without his coat. The 23 guests dispersed with the particular animated hush of people who have witnessed something they will be dining on for a month. And Marin was left in the hall with the footman extinguishing candles around her. Waiting, Lucian Vane came to find her in the library. He always found people in rooms they had not been told to wait in, which was, she had decided, one of his more unnerving qualities. He was tall in a way that made rooms feel considered rather than crowded, and he moved without sound, and when she looked up from the shelf where she had been pretending to read the spine of a botanical index, he was already still in the doorway. "You will want to know," he said, "that Ashvire will not repeat tonight's performance. You will want to know that Cecily is unhurt. You will want to know that you are not dismissed." A pause. "You are staring." "I am attempting," Marin said, "to determine whether you are telling me that I am kept on out of gratitude or out of spite. Does it matter? It matters rather a great deal to me." He crossed to the chair by the window and did not sit in it, but rested one hand on its back in the way of a man who is used to having something solid to hold. His hands were, she had noticed some time ago, the hands of someone who worked. There were ink stains at the second finger of his right hand and a pale scar at the base of his left thumb that had no business on the hand of a duke. She had wondered about that scar. She had then instructed herself to stop wondering about it, and had largely succeeded. "You are kept on," he said, "because Cecily needs you. Because you are the only person in this house who has ever treated her as though she were capable of being more than decorative, and because what you did tonight was right, and I did not do it, and that is a fact I am going to have to live with." The library was quiet. A moth was troubling the lamp between them. Marin looked at the man who had been her employer for 3 years at a remove of 40 feet and thought, "He has just given me a piece of himself he did not intend to part with." "The assembly," she said. "The one at midsummer. At Wenthorpe." His hand tightened on the chair back. "What of it? Ashvere will be there, so will half those guests." "Yes, and you intend to." "I intend," he said, "to manage it." There was a thing he was not telling her. She could see the weight of it in the set of his shoulders, the way a man carries a stone he has decided is his alone to carry. She had seen that particular posture before, in her father at the end, and she had learned that when men wore it, asking was useless. She filed it away instead, the way she filed everything, and waited. "Midsummer is 3 weeks," she said. 17 days. "Then we had best," she said, setting down the botanical index, "begin to be useful." She had come to Harrogate by the standard route of women without alternatives. Her father had been a land steward, clever and conscientious, and dead at 49 of a winter fever that had also taken her mother 6 months before, leaving Marin with £22, an education absurdly in excess of her station, and a working knowledge of crop rotation, estate accounts, and the medicinal properties of every plant that grew in the east of England. Lady Cecily's governess had departed in March, and the Duke had been applying to agencies with, by all accounts, notable desperation and poor results. Marin had been presented by the vicar's wife as a last resort. The Duke had interviewed her for 11 minutes, asked 4 questions about Cecily's temperament and none about her own, and hired her at a salary that was fair and delivered on the 1st of each month without requiring her to ask. She had been grateful for this. She had been careful, above all things, to be only that. Cecily was 20 and had been managed since birth by the combination of her beauty, her grief, and the assumption that she was fragile. She was not fragile. She was furious, which she had learned to perform as sadness, because sadness was permitted and fury was not, and she had taken to Marin in the specific way of clever people who have been waiting a long time for someone to notice the difference. They read together and argued, and Marin taught her to keep accounts in the small plain book Cecily had hidden under her mattress since she was 15. And in return, Cecily told her things about Harrogate that no one had thought to tell the companion. That the Duke had not smiled, genuinely, in 4 years, that the steward of the North Quarter, a man named Pelham, had been in the family's service for 2 decades and had recently grown very quiet, that there was a second set of estate books that the Duke examined alone, and that Cecily had once seen him push flat on his desk and cover with his forearm when she had entered without knocking. Marin had absorbed this information with her customary stillness. She had then, on the following Tuesday afternoon, offered to organize the estate correspondence on the grounds that it was causing the Duke's secretary visible distress. The secretary had been so grateful he had wept slightly. She had been working in the estate office every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon for 5 months. The second set of books was locked in the bottom left drawer of the Duke's desk. The lock was a Brahma pattern, small and clean, and she had not touched it. She was waiting for a reason. She was beginning to think the reason was coming toward her like weather. Her father's gift to her had been this: numbers did not lie when people did. Show her a column of figures, and she could feel the wrongness in them before she had worked out where it lived, the same way she could feel a room's allegiances from the doorway. It was a plain gift. useful and invisible, exactly like herself, and in 5 months of Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, she had felt something wrong in the Harrogate accounts, like a splinter she had not yet found the end of. She had said nothing. She was not yet certain. And certainty mattered more than quickness, her father had always said. The truth will keep. Only lies need hurrying. She was thinking of this. She was standing at the window of the estate office on the morning of the 3rd day after the assembly, with a ledger open and a line of figures that did not settle, when the door opened and Pelham came in. She had the instinct to close the ledger. She overruled it, which was a decision she made with her hands before her mind had finished consulting, and kept her finger on the line of figures instead. Pelham was 53, meticulous, gray-haired, gentle-voiced in all circumstances, and he had been watching her for 5 months with the particular attention of a man who has not yet decided whether she is useful or dangerous. Miss Ashby. He crossed to the chair across from her and sat, which he had not done before. I wonder if I might speak frankly. I have always found, she said, that when someone prefaces frankness, they generally mean the opposite. But please. He smiled. It did not reach his eyes. You have a remarkable capacity for making enemies, for someone in your position. I struck Edmund Ashfire. I did not count him as someone I was keeping. I am not speaking of Ashfire. A pause. He had a habit of folding his hands on his knee when speaking, a careful gesture, deliberate as punctuation. I am told you intend to accompany Lady Cecily to the Wenthorpe Assembly. I do. I would counsel against it. She looked at him. He held the look with the ease of a man accustomed to being believed. You are kind to counsel me, she said. May I ask your interest? The Duke's peace of mind, Wenthorpe, will be difficult enough. A repeat of Tuesday evening would be. There will be no repeat of Tuesday evening, she said, because Edmund Ashfire will not speak to Lady Cecily at Wenthorpe. She closed the ledger. Why are the North Quarter grain receipts itemized separately from the main account, Mr. Pelham? She had not planned to ask it. The question arrived in her mouth the way the slap had arrived in her hand, before thought, because something in the particular quality of his stillness in that moment had slid the splinter home. Pelham did not move. He was very good at not moving. Administrative clarity, he said. The Duke's preference. Of course. She smiled at him with her full face, which she almost never did. Thank you for your counsel. I'll take it under advisement. He left. She looked at the door for a long time after it closed. Then she opened the ledger again and found the splinter and held it to the light. He had arrived with the softness of something dropped from a height. That was how she would think of it later, afterward, in the years when she could afford to think about it, that the whole edifice had been resting on one line in a secondary account, and the line had been sitting there for 4 years, patient as a rot in a joist, waiting for someone to press. The North Quarter grain receipts had been consistently itemized at a figure roughly 1/8 higher than the corresponding delivery records in the County Mill archive. She had access to the County Mill archive because she had thought to request it 6 weeks ago on the administrative pretext of verifying the season's yields, a request the secretary had processed without interest. The difference across 4 years was not, taken alone, catastrophic. It was the kind of difference that could be attributed to storage loss, to seasonal variation, to any of a dozen legitimate causes. But taken alongside the variation she had noticed in the timber sale entries in February, and the discrepancy between the coal delivery invoices and the coal merchant's own receipts, which she had obtained 2 weeks ago under the pretense of disputing an overcharge on Cecily's behalf, taken all together, the figure compounded into something that had a name. And the name was Pelham's. The name was 4 years of small and careful theft, mediated entirely by documents, from a duke too sunk in grief to look closely at the accounts of a steward he had inherited and trusted and never thought to doubt. She sat for a very long time with this knowledge. She did not weep, or curse, or feel the righteous heat of discovery. She felt, instead, the weight of the shape of it, the way a man must feel when he understands that what he thought was solid ground is a board laid over nothing. She needed to know how much the Duke knew. She needed to know whether there was a second set of books because he suspected, or because Pelham had a second set of books of his own and had constructed the first as camouflage. She needed to know whether she had 17 days or fewer. She needed, above all, to speak to Lucian Vane in terms that were not oblique, and she needed to do this without Pelham learning that she had, and she had no earthly idea how to accomplish any of it. Because she was a companion with 22 pounds to her name and a pile of documents she had obtained largely by being the kind of person no one imagined had a plan. She thought of her father. She thought of what he had told her the year before he died, when she had come to him frightened about the squire's steward who had been watching her too carefully. "Don't be small on their behalf," he had said. "Be small because it suits you. The moment it stops suiting you, stop." She gathered her papers. She went to find the Duke. He was in the long gallery, which was not a place he was usually to be found, but Harrogate was a house that yielded information about the movements of its master if one listened with the right attention, and Marin had been listening for 3 years. He was standing before a portrait of a woman she recognized as his wife, dead 4 years, and his back was to her when she entered. He did not turn. "You have found something," he said. She stopped walking. "How did you know?" "Because you walked differently. You have a particular walk when you are containing something." He turned then, and she saw the thing she had not seen in the library 2 nights ago, that he was tired in a way that sleep would not mend. "Sit down, Miss Ashby. I would rather stand. So would I. Sit down anyway." She sat. He came to stand before the window, his back to the light, and she was struck once more by the quality of his stillness, the quality she had catalogued and filed away a dozen times, that this was a man who had learned to be very quiet in a very large amount of pain. "You know about Pelham," she said. A breath of something crossed his face. "Not surprise. When did you find it?" "This morning." "The grain receipts against the mill archive. But you have known longer. 9 months. His voice was level. It was the most frightening kind of level, the kind that costs. "I began to see it 9 months ago. I did not yet have the full picture." "But you have the second ledger." He looked at her. She did not look away. "The second ledger," he said finally, "is Pelham's. He constructed the estate books as a double, the primary set for my review, the secondary for his own tracking. I found the secondary by accident in February when I came to the office late, and he had left it on the desk. He did not see me. I photographed the relevant pages in my memory and said nothing. Because you needed the complete evidence before you moved, because moving before the evidence was complete would have cost me Cecily." He crossed to the chair she had declined and sat in it, and the exhaustion in him settled like something physical. "Pelham holds her marriage contract. The late steward's doing, my father's steward, drawn up when Cecily was born, a financial provision in the event of my death without male heirs. Pelham has spent 4 years constructing a case that if the provision were called, the estate's accounts as they stand would require an investigation that would touch every member of this family. He cannot actually void the contract, but he can make exercising it cost enough that Cecily would decline it rather than drag Harrogate through a public proceeding." Marin was very still. He has been stealing from you in amounts small enough not to trigger scrutiny, while documenting the pattern in a way that only becomes a weapon if you come after him. Mutually assured ruin. Yes, and the Wenthrop Assembly. He was quiet for a moment. There is a trustee meeting at Wenthrop, the 3 men who oversee the provision's terms. Pelham has requested to speak to them. I do not know what he intends to say. A pause. I have 17 days. Marin looked at the portrait of the dead Duchess over his shoulder. The dead Duchess had, she noticed for the first time, a very determined set to her jaw. You have, she said carefully, a person in this house who has been reading your accounts with the methodology of a land steward's daughter for 5 months, who has independent access to every external document required for comparison, and who has a habit of being in rooms without anyone noticing her. She met his eyes. Use me. The expression that crossed his face then was not what she expected. She had expected consideration or calculation or the grateful relief of a man handed a tool. She had not expected the thing that was quieter than all of those. That was, she filed it away before she could name it, the expression of a man who had been standing alone with a weight for a very long time and had just heard someone offer to stand beside him. He was quiet for so long, she thought he meant to refuse. Miss Ashby, he said, I should tell you that this is not your burden to take on. It is Lady Cecily's provision, she said. It is therefore mine. Another silence. Somewhere outside the long window, a blackbird was singing with an unconcerned persistence that the moment entirely failed to deserve. Then, the Duke said, I think I should tell you something I have not told anyone. He told her about the letter. It had come 4 years ago, 6 weeks after his wife's death, and it was in Pelham's hand, and it contained a record, meticulous, dated, attested in 3 places, of sums paid from the estate accounts to a physician in Ipswich. The implication, stated nowhere directly and present on every page, was that the sums bore a relationship to his wife's death that a sufficiently determined inquiry might wish to examine. There was nothing to the implication. He was certain there was nothing to it. But there was a name. There was a date. And the letter had been delivered not to him, but to his mother-in-law, who had since died, and who had, in her final year, looked at him with a coldness that had cost him something he had not yet managed to name. He showed it to your mother-in-law, Marin said. I believe so. And she believed it. She did not speak to me of it. She simply stopped. He was looking at his hands. She was here when Cecily was small. She visited twice yearly. After the letter, she stopped. Marin looked at the man across from her, the grave, still, quiet man who had spent 4 years living under a cloud he could not address, because addressing it meant the lever fell. She felt something sharp and clean move through her, which was anger in its honest form, before it settled into the colder and more useful shape of resolution. Then, we need the letter, she said, and the document trail complete enough to take it apart line by line. And we need witnesses at Wenthrop who will hear the reading. We have 17 days. I need 11. She stood. I need access to the locked drawer. He reached into his waistcoat pocket and set a small brass key on the table between them without a word. She looked at it for a moment. Then she picked it up. She had not been wrong about the accounts. The second ledger, opened now on her own desk in the estate office, was a masterwork of meticulous bad faith. Pelham had not stolen clumsily. He had stolen the way a craftsman works, with patience and precision and an eye for proportion, shaving amounts from a dozen different lines in a dozen different quarters so that no single entry would stand out to a cursory review. It had required someone who understood the underlying structure of an estate at a level below quarterly examination, someone like a land steward's daughter, to see the pattern for what it was. The false entries in the second ledger served two purposes. They tracked what had been taken, and they demonstrated that the estate accounts, read alongside them, could be made to imply almost anything. It was, she had to admit with a reluctant professional admiration, beautiful in its way. Her father would have seen it in a morning. She spent 4 days with the ledgers, the mill archive, the coal merchant's receipts, the timber sale records, and the county assessor's rolls she obtained by writing a letter that implied a routine review and signing it with the estate secretary's name and a forged approximation of his hand, which she did with some discomfort but without hesitation. Because the truth required instruments, and she had what was available. On the evening of the 4th day, she had a complete table of discrepancies, dated and sourced, sufficient to prove 4 years of systematic falsification. She copied it in her clearest hand into a small plain book she kept buttoned inside her dress. On the 5th day, she found the letter. It was not in the locked drawer, which had been a decoy the Duke had left for Pelham's comfort. It was in the false bottom of the drawer above it, behind a packet of estate surveys from 12 years previous, sealed in a plain cover. She held it to the light of the window, feeling the weight of it. Then she tucked it inside the plain book and said nothing to anyone. On the 6th day, Pelham came to her. He did not come to the estate office. He came to the small parlor where she sat with Cecily each afternoon, and he knocked, and he was shown in, and he sat in the chair across from her, with his hands folded on his knee and his voice in its accustomed softness. Cecily had been called away by her maid on an errand that Marin had not arranged, which meant Pelham had arranged it, which was, she noted, an escalation. "Miss Ashby," he said, "I am told you have been working through the grain accounts." "I am told," she said, "that the summer yields were strong. I am attempting to verify the storage records." "Very thorough." He smiled. "I wonder if it might be, perhaps, more thorough than is good for you. I find thoroughness is generally its own reward. In some positions, the smile did not alter. Your position, as I understand it, rests on the Duke's continued approval. The Duke's approval is, as I understand it, currently extended on the basis of some gratitude relating to Tuesday's assembly." He unfolded his hands and refolded them. "Gratitude is a warm season, Miss Ashby. It does not last the winter." She looked at him for a long moment. "Is that a threat, Mitter, Pelham, or a kindness?" "It is neither. It is advice." He rose. "The Wenthorpe Assembly is in 11 days. I would recommend you remain at Harrogate with Lady Cecily." "Lady Cecily," she said, "is going to Wenthorpe." He paused at the door. The pausing was calculated. "That is, of course, His Grace's decision." "It is, and he has made it." The pause extended 1 beat further than comfort required. Then he left. She sat with the small plain book in her lap and the letter buttoned inside it, and the very clear understanding that she had 11 days to prepare a case for which she had a single audience. 3 trustees at a Wenthorpe drawing room, an unknown document she had not yet read, and a man who had been running her employer's ruin with the patience of a mason building a wall, 1 stone at a time, for 4 years. She opened the letter. She read it once. She turned it over. She read the physician's name, and the dates, and the sums, and the careful implication. Then she set it down on her knee and sat very still while the full elegance of it assembled itself in her mind. Because she was her father's daughter, and the full elegance of things, however terrible, was visible to her. And then she saw the flaw. It was not a large flaw. It was, in fact, exactly the kind of flaw that someone who was not a land steward's daughter reading documents beside an account ledger would not notice. The physician named was in Ipswich. The dates in the letter placed him at Harrogate twice, in the month of July and the month of September, 4 years ago. The dates in the estate accounts, the primary accounts that any inquiry would examine, showed the corresponding sums paid not to a physician, but to a builder, for repairs to the east wall of the house in June. 1 month earlier. The overlap was impossible. A man could not be paid in June for services delivered in July, unless the invoices had been fabricated, and if the invoices had been fabricated, then Pelham had fabricated them, because Pelham had managed the accounts in that period while the Duke was managing his grief. The letter was not evidence of wrongdoing. The letter was evidence of Pelham, and it had been sitting in a falsified account for 4 years because no one had looked at the dates. She sat with this for a long time. The blackbird was at the window again. She had decided, over the past week, that the blackbird was Harrogate's unofficial conscience, present at every important moment with the same fundamental indifference to human difficulty. She went to find the Duke. She told him about the flaw. He sat with it. He did not weep, or exclaim, or show what it cost him to hear it. He closed his eyes for a moment, and his hand found the arm of the chair, and she watched the knuckles whiten and then deliberate themselves back to stillness. When he opened his eyes, the look he gave her was the look of a man seeing clearly after a very long time in dim light. 4 years, he said. 4 years. She died thinking, yes, silence, the blackbird, a door somewhere in the house. Miss Ashby, he said, very quietly. I owe you a frank statement. You owe me nothing. I do. He turned the look on her that she had been carefully not receiving for 10 days now, the one that was quieter than gratitude and more dangerous. 3 years you have been in this house. I have, he stopped. I have been remiss. You were managing a great many things. I was managing them alone when I need not have been. A pause. That is not a sentiment I am accustomed to expressing. I know, she said. I have been watching you manage things alone for 3 years. The faintest line appeared at the corner of his mouth. It was not quite a smile. She filed it. 7 days, he said. I need one more thing, she said. I need Pelham's own handwriting to match against the letter. Something from before the letter was written, something in the public record. The estate surveys. The originals from 12 years ago are in the county archive. Then I need to go to the county archive. He stood. I will take you tomorrow. She had not expected that. She looked at him. He was already at the door. The estate business, she said, requires the Duke's seal in any case. And I find, he said, without turning, that I have been absent from my own business long enough. They drove to the archive together, which was a fact that Harrogate processed over the following 2 days with the rapid efficiency of a household that has been waiting for something to happen. Marin was aware of this processing without attending to it. There were 7 days and a letter to match and a case to build, and sentiment was a thing she kept in a very small box, in a very high shelf, and opened only when the practical business of the day permitted. The archive clerk was a small man of great authority who had strong opinions about the correct organization of county documents and a deep suspicion of people who came to look at estate surveys. The Duke's presence modified his suspicion into something that resembled gracious cooperation, and Marin was given the 12-year-old surveys in their original covers and left alone with them at a table by the window, while the Duke managed the clerk's professional concerns at the counter. The handwriting was Pelham's. She had known it would be. She compared 3 signatures on dated survey notes against the signature on the letter and felt the certainty of it settle in her bones like a completed sum. On the drive home, The Duke said, without preamble, "When I was 31, my father showed me a letter he had received. It concerned a matter of money I had not known about. He had believed it for 11 years. A pause. I mention this only because you should understand that I know something about the particular quality of a lie that travels through documents." She looked at the road ahead. "What did you do about it?" "I was 31. I raged. I was incoherent. It cost me a year I should have spent differently." A pause that carried weight. "You are more efficient than I was. I had a better teacher," she said. He glanced at her. "My father," she said. "He always said the truth will keep. Only lies need hurrying." The line appeared at the corner of his mouth again. This time it went further. She caught the breath of it from the corner of her own eye and filed it in the wrong shelf, which was, she acknowledged to herself, a structural error she was going to have to address at some point. "That," he said, "is the best thing I have heard in 4 years." She said nothing. The countryside went past. The blackbird, impossibly, was in a hedge at the roadside and sang 4 notes as the carriage passed, and was gone. They had 5 days. Pelham made his second move on the 4th. He came to her again, this time in the garden, where she was cutting back the late roses with Cecily, and his gentleness had acquired an edge below it, like a knife in silk. "Miss Ashby," he said. A word, if Lady Cecily would permit. Cecily was, as Marin had long suspected, a great deal tougher than anyone had troubled to investigate. She took the shears and said, pleasantly of course, "Miss Pelham," and went to the far end of the garden, where she proceeded to deadhead roses with an attention that did not deceive Marin in the slightest. Pelham watched her go, then he turned back to Marin, and the softness was still there, and underneath it was something that had given up pretending. "I am going to be direct," he said. "I know you have been in the locked drawer. I know you have the survey records. And I know, a breath. I know what else you found." She kept her hands in her gloves and her face in its habitual stillness. "You have been thorough," she said. "I have had 4 years of practice." A pause. "There is an arrangement available to you, Miss Ashby, that would make this considerably more comfortable for everyone. The Duke's approval is not a reliable long-term strategy for a woman in your position. The estate accounts, on the other hand, could show a salary for a second steward's assistant that would be more than adequate for a woman of your—" "No," she said, "education and capability." "I am offering, I heard you," she said. "The answer is no." He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, the softness was all the way gone. "You cannot win this, Miss Ashby. You are a companion. You have no standing, no name, no—" "I have," she said, "a very complete set of documents. I have the letter. I have the survey signatures. I have 4 years of cross-referenced accounts against 5 independent external sources." She met his eyes without effort, which was a thing she had not been sure she could do until she was doing it. "I will see you at Wenthorpe, Mr. Pelham." She walked back to Cecily. Cecily handed her the shears without comment. They finished the roses in silence. That evening, Cecily came to her room. She sat on the edge of the bed with her hands in her lap and said, "Marin, I know there is something I am not being told." Marin looked at her. Cecily was 20 and had been managed all her life and had a jaw set exactly like her brother's, and she had been carrying her own suspicions for longer than either of them had acknowledged. "Yes," Marin said, "there is. Is Lucian in danger?" "He was. He is considerably less so than he was a week ago." Cecily was quiet. "Because of you. Because of both of us. Your account book. The small plain one you showed me in September. You had already found the discrepancy in the quarterly household records." Cecily blinked. "I thought I was wrong." "I thought I had miscounted. You were entirely right." I have the household records in my own table. It is the figure I used to verify the coal merchant's receipts." She looked at the girl who was not, had never been, fragile. "You were the first, Cecily. You found it before either of us." The expression on Cecily's face did something complicated and then settled into a composure that was not the performed kind. "What do we need tomorrow?" "Sleep," Marin said, "and your very best dress." And that account book. The Wenthorpe Assembly was held in the Great Hall of Wenthorpe Park, which was a house that expressed its wealth through the thickness of its rugs and the excessive number of its candles. The 3 trustees were already in attendance when the Harrogate party arrived. Sir Thomas Leigh, who was magistrate for 2 counties and had eyebrows that constituted a separate entity. Mr. Calloway, the family's solicitor since the Duke's grandfather, and old Mr. Piers, who was half-deaf and entirely sharp, and who had been Cecily's late grandfather's closest friend, and whom, Marin judged, no power on earth was going to move if he had already formed a view. Pelham arrived 20 minutes after them. He moved through the room with his customary meticulous ease, speaking to the trustees in turn with a warmth that came from long familiarity. He glanced once at Marin, across the length of the room, and the glance contained a message she received clearly. He had an ace she had not seen. She was right. It arrived in the form of a young man she did not know, shown in from the east door at 7 o'clock, 25, nervous, over-barbered, with the look of a clerk, elevated past his confidence. He crossed directly to Sir Thomas Leigh. He handed him a document. Sir Thomas read it, and his extraordinary eyebrows moved, and he looked at the Duke with an expression that was not hostile, but was not comfortable. The Duke, who had been watching her watch all of this, came to stand beside her in the manner of 2 people examining a painting. "Pelham has a witness," she said, quietly. "Yes, I expected it." She looked at the young man. He had a tell, not the hands, which were reasonably still, but the jaw, which was doing something small and involuntary when his eye crossed Pelham's direction. She had seen that tell before, in a man who did not want to be doing what he was doing. How did Pelham find him? "I think," the Duke said, very quietly, "that Pelham has had him for some time. He was the physician's assistant, the Ipswich physician. He was 14 at the time. And what does he claim he saw?" "I do not yet know." She looked at the young man for 3 more seconds. Then she turned to the Duke. "I need Lady Cecily's account book, and I need you to arrange that Sir Thomas receives us before the formal meeting begins. 10 minutes is sufficient." He looked at her. She looked back. There was, she was aware, an entire conversation occurring in the space between them that neither of them was saying, and that she was going to have to address at some future point that was not the present. "Very well," he said. She found Cecily and took the account book and went to Sir Thomas. Sir Thomas received them in the library with Mr. Calloway, who was old enough to have processed a great many situations with equanimity, and without Mr. Piers, who had fallen asleep in a chair in the corner of the main room and was not to be disturbed. She set the small, plain book on the table in front of Sir Thomas. She set beside it the table of discrepancies, the letter, and the 3 survey signatures laid side by side with the letter's signature. Sir Thomas examined them. He was, she had been told, the kind of man who read with his entire body. His eyebrows did a great deal of work. When he came to the dates, the June invoice, and the July dates in the letter, he stopped and went back and read again. "The dates," he said. "Cannot be reconciled," she said. "If the letter is genuine, the invoices are falsified. If the invoices are genuine and they are dated and countersigned by the county assessor, the letter was written after the fact, on behalf of someone who did not have access to the invoices. And this account book. Lady Cecily's. The household discrepancy. It corroborates the steward's secondary ledger on the household side. Sir Thomas looked at Cecily, who met his gaze without difficulty. You kept this yourself. Since I was 15, Cecily said. My mother taught me to keep accounts. I thought it was best to have an independent record. Mr. Calloway, who had been reading quietly, said, without looking up, the signature match is very clear. It is, Marin agreed. Sir Thomas set down the papers and arranged his eyebrows into what she interpreted as a conclusion. I will receive the steward's testimony, he said, and then I will receive the document testimony. In that order. He looked at Marin. You will be present. I will be present, she said. The formal meeting convened at 8. Mr. Pierce had been awakened and established in a chair of honor and given tea, and was alert in the attentive way of the genuinely clever elderly. The room arranged itself the way rooms do when something is about to happen. Witnesses at the walls, the principals at the center, the neutral authority at the table. Pelham stood with a composed ease that she recognized as practiced. The young clerk stood beside him, still doing the thing with his jaw. Sir Thomas opened the matter plainly. He stated the purpose, the trustee review of the estate provision, and certain questions that had arisen regarding the estate accounts. He asked Pelham to speak to the accounts first. Pelham spoke for 8 minutes. He was, she had to acknowledge, very good. He acknowledged the discrepancies she had found with a graceful preemption, framing them as administrative variations resulting from a period of transitional record-keeping during the late stewardess's illness. He described the letter in terms that were careful and formal, and carried the weight of his own expressed reluctance, his loyalty to the family, his pain in finding himself obliged to raise the matter. He then introduced the young clerk, a Mr. Gideon Marsh, formerly of the Ipswich practice of the late Dr. Sutton. Mr. Marsh gave his account in a voice that was admirably steady. He had been present, he said, on 2 occasions in July and September, when a man he would now identify as the Duke, had visited the practice to discuss a matter relating to a patient. He had been young, he had understood only fragments, but he had understood that the matter related to an illness and to certain preparations and to a sum of money. The room was very quiet. Sir Thomas looked at the Duke. The Duke's face was what it was, still, grave, carrying its weight in the way she had now catalogued enough to read. He said nothing. He was looking at Mr. Marsh with an attention that was not hostile, that was, she thought, watching his profile, the attention of a man who understands something the witness does not. Miss Marsh, Sir Thomas said, with the patience of a man who has been doing this for 30 years. I am going to ask you one question, and I want you to consider it before you answer. He set the invoice and the letter side by side in front of the young man. Were the visits you recall in July and September, or could they have been in June and August? Mr. Marsh looked at the documents. He looked at them for a long time. His jaw was very still. He looked at Pelham. Pelham said nothing. Mr. Marsh looked back at the documents. He was 25 and had been clerk to a dead physician and had been carrying a piece of testimony for, Marin calculated, at least 4 months, probably more. And the weight of it was visible in the particular quality of his stillness, which was not the stillness of conviction, but the stillness of a man who has been balancing on something and has just been shown the floor. His voice stopped. He looked again at Pelham. I believe I may have been, he said carefully, mistaken in the months. The room exhaled. Sir Thomas did not press the moment. He gathered the documents with deliberate hands. Then Marin set the letter and the invoice on the table before him. The invoices for the east wall repairs, she said, are dated the 3rd of June of that year and countersigned by the county assessor's office. The sum corresponds to the figure in the estate primary accounts under the builder's name. The figure in the letter corresponds to the same sum in the secondary account under the physician's name. She set the letter beside the invoice. The same money is in 2 places. It cannot be both. And if the invoice is genuine, which the assessor's countersignature confirms, then the figure in the letter was entered into the secondary account after the fact, by the person who held the secondary account. She laid the 3 signatures side by side. This is the survey signature of the estate steward from 12 years prior. This is the letter's signature. Mr. Calloway, if you would be good enough. Mr. Calloway, who had been prepared for this moment, produced a glass. He held it over the first signature, and then the second. They are identical, he said. He did not say it dramatically. He said it the way he would say any finding. The effect was, in its way, more complete than drama. The room processed this in silence. Mr. Piers, who had been attending with the air of a man following a score he already knew, said in a voice that carried without effort, "Same hand." No question. Sir Thomas looked at Pelham. Pelham's composure was extraordinary. She gave him that. There was only one moment, one instant, in which she saw it shift, not into guilt, not into anger, but into something she had not expected, a grief that was genuine. It crossed his face like weather, quick and involuntary, and it was directed not at the documents but at the Duke. She saw a man who had served a family for 2 decades, who had watched his employer grieve and had decided, at some bent and broken point in his own sorrow, that he was owed something he had not been given, and who had built 4 years of careful ruin on that decision, and who was, in this moment, seeing it complete. She kept this. She did not let it touch the table. "Miss Marsh," Sir Thomas said, "with the patience of a man who has been doing this for 30 years, I am going to ask you one question, and I want you to consider it before you answer." He set the invoice and the letter side by side in front of the young man. "Were the visits you recall in July and September, or could they have been in June and August?" Mr. Marsh looked at the documents. He looked at them for a long time. His jaw was very still. He looked at Pelham. Pelham said nothing. Mr. Marsh looked back at the documents. He was 25 and had been clerk to a dead physician, and had been carrying a piece of testimony for, Marin calculated, at least 4 months, probably more, and the weight of it was visible in the particular quality of his stillness, which was not the stillness of conviction, but the stillness of a man who has been balancing on something and has just been shown the floor. His voice stopped. He looked again at Pelham. "I believe I may have been," he said carefully, "mistaken in the months." The room exhaled. Sir Thomas did not press the moment. He gathered the documents with deliberate hands. "I think," he said, "we have what we require for the trust review." He looked at Pelham, and his look was not unkind. It was, in its way, the most devastating thing in the room, because it was the look of a man who has found the truth and has no pleasure in it. "Mr. Pelham, I would ask you to remain." Pelham remained. His composure held, and she did not look away from it, because she had promised herself she would not look away from the ending, whatever it was. The Duke said, very quietly, "Leave us, please," and the trustees withdrew, and Marin took Cecily's arm and moved toward the door. She heard, as she crossed the threshold, the Duke say Pelham's name. Just the name. in the voice that was quiet because it had never needed to be anything else. She did not hear what followed. She closed the door. Cecily was trembling, very slightly, with the fine tremor of a person who has been holding themselves very still for a very long time. Marin kept her hand on her arm and walked her to the far end of the corridor, and then stood with her by the window while the girl gathered herself. "It's over," Cecily said. "The worst of it. What will happen to him?" "An allowance," Marin said, "and a retirement to the country. The Duke will not prosecute." She looked at Cecily's face. "You knew he wouldn't. He is not." Cecily stopped. "He is not a man who destroys things when he can put them down instead." A pause. "He is that. Actually, he is exactly that. He just forgot it for a while." They stood by the window until the door at the end of the corridor opened. The Duke came out alone. He walked toward them with the particular quality of a man who has just set down something very heavy and is relearning how to move without it. He stopped before them. He looked at Cecily first, and what passed between them was the kind of thing that had no business being witnessed, so Marin looked at the window. "Miss Ashby," he said. She turned. He was looking at her with the steady look she had been filing away for 11 days, the one she had put on the wrong shelf. And she understood now that it was always going to be on the wrong shelf, because the wrong shelf was the right one. "There are material stakes," he said, "that are now dead." She looked at him. "Yes, I find that the subject of what I wish to say is no longer occluded by those stakes. No," she said. "Then I should say it." A pause. He was very still. "I do not wish you to stay at Harrogate because you are useful. I do not wish you to stay because of Cecily. I do not wish you to stay because the estate is better managed when you are in it, though all of those things are true." He reached into his coat pocket and set something on the window ledge between them, a small brass key, the key she had returned to him 11 days ago. "I put this where you would find it. 6 months ago. I had been watching you look at the wrong drawer and deciding not to open the right one, and I thought..." He stopped. "I thought you might. I thought, if you had reason to look, I was hoping in some defective and inarticulate way that you would look." A pause. "Marry me because you wish it, Miss Ashby. It is the only reason I will take." She looked at the key. She looked at his face. She thought of her father, who had told her, "Don't be small on their behalf. Be small because it suits you," and thought, "It no longer suits me." "Lucian," she said. It was the first time she had used his name. He heard it the way she had meant it. "I wish it." He did not smile, because he was not, as she had catalogued, a man who smiled without cause. He did something quieter and more final, which was to take the key from the window ledge and put it in her hand and close her fingers around it. Cecily made a small sound behind them that was not precisely tears. "I am going," she said, distinctly, "to go and find Mr. Calloway and tell him about the account book." A pause. For an extended period of time, they were married in the second week of September in the small chapel at Harrogate with the leaves just turning. There were 12 people, by the bride's specific instruction, and there was no orchestra, and the flowers were from the garden. Sir Thomas Lay came and wept briefly, but with dignity. Mr. Piers fell asleep during the sermon and woke in time to toast the couple with a glass of the wrong wine and a comment about the bride's plainness that he clearly considered a compliment, and which made Lucian Vane, for the first time in 5 years, laugh, genuinely, fully, in a way that filled the small chapel, and which was, in its way, the moment she would remember longest. The estate accounts were reconstructed over the following quarter by Marin herself, in the capacity that was agreed between herself and Mr. Calloway to be called deputy steward on account of them both finding estate stewardess an unsatisfactory coinage. Gideon Marsh wrote a letter of contrition that arrived in October. The Duke replied briefly and sent him a reference to a reputable firm in London because the boy had been frightened and badly used and was 25. Pelham retired to a cottage in Suffolk on a quarterly allowance that was more than adequate, and the last intelligence of him was that he had taken up the growing of vegetables with some dedication, which Maren thought, when she heard it, was a reasonable penance and possibly a mercy. The small plain book, Cecily's account book, was framed and hung in the estate office, where it remained. Cecily, the following spring, presented a complete translation of a French agricultural treatise to a meeting of the County Land Society, under her own name, introduced by her brother, before an audience of 43. The applause was sustained. There was, the following summer, a year and a month after the Harrogate Assembly, on a morning that had the particular quality of early light in that particular valley, a knock at the door of the estate office. Maren was at the desk, which was now her desk in the plain and settled way of things that have found their proper place. She was reading a column of figures that added to a sum she had anticipated and hoped for. She did not look up. "You are staring," said a voice from the doorway. She looked up. "I am," she said, attempting to determine whether these accounts are as good as they look, or whether I have made an error. He came to stand behind her and read the column over her shoulder. "They are correct," he said. "You read upside down." One of my few genuine accomplishments. His hand rested on the back of her chair, which was the habit she had added to her ledger of him, the one that had replaced the scar and the ink stain and the quality of his silences, because it meant, I am here, and here is where I intend to stay. The knocker from the East Field is here. He says the barley yield is exceptional. I know, she said. I have just added it. Then perhaps, he said, you might come and see it. She capped the ink and set down the pen. Outside the window, the light was moving on the stone, the way light moves when it has all the time in the world. The barley field would be gold this morning. The blackbird would be somewhere in the hedgerow, attending to its own business with perfect unconcern. She had come to Harrogate with £22 and a plain gift and the habit of staying small, and she had set down the habit at the moment it stopped serving her, and every door she had opened since had led to a room with better light. Her father had been right. The truth kept, only lies needed hurrying. She rose and took his arm, and they went out into the morning. If this story warmed you, if it gave you something of what Maren carried, that quiet certainty that truth held in plain hands is enough, then you are exactly the reader I tell these stories for. There is always a chair by this fire, always the kettle on, always one more story waiting to be told. I would love to know, what moment did you know? Before Maren knew it herself. The locked drawer, the dates, the letter held to the light. Tell me in the comments the instant the whole thing came clear for you. If you would like to stay by the fire and be here when the next story is lit, the subscribe button keeps your place. Sleep gently and be good to the ones who do the quiet work in rooms no one thinks to look in. That work, as we have seen, tends to matter most.